The envelope crossed the table at 20 minutes to 8 on a Sunday evening in March, and it made almost no sound at all. That is the part I still think about. 9 people were sitting around that dining room, and a man slid a sealed envelope past the water glasses and the bread plate and the little silver dish of butter, shaped like a rose, and none of us heard a thing. It stopped about 4 inches from my hand. The paper was heavy, cream-coloured. Somebody had spent money on it. Douglas Whitlock did not look away from me when he let go of it. He is a big man with a flat voice and hands that have clearly been broken more than once, and he said, "I'd like you to read this before anybody talks about a date." Across from me, my daughter Claire put down her fork. She has a way of going very still when she's frightened, the same way she did at 9 years old when the smoke alarm went off, and I saw her do it then. Her fiancé, Grant, leaned back in his chair and rested one arm along the top of it. He was not nervous. He had the loose, comfortable posture of a man who already knows how a conversation ends. His mother, Lorraine, refolded her napkin in her lap twice. The envelope had one word on the front, printed in a serif font by a machine that cost more than my truck. Understanding. I picked it up. It was thicker than I expected. Maybe 30 pages, and I could feel a paperclip through the paper about 2/3 of the way down. "Go ahead," Grant said. "It isn't personal. I have opened a lot of envelopes in my life. I spent 39 years in the United States Army, and a fair number of those years came down to what was inside a folder somebody handed me at 4 a.m. Deployment orders, casualty reports, a letter from a mother in Ohio asking me why exactly and expecting an answer I did not have. Compared to any of that, a sealed envelope at a dinner table in a nice house in Indian Hill should have been nothing. But I looked at Claire's face, and I looked at the way Lorraine would not lift her eyes off the tablecloth, and I understood that whatever was inside was going to change the shape of that room. I broke the seal with my thumb. For the next 2 minutes, the only sound in that dining room was paper. My name is Warren Doyle. I am 73 years old. I live in Batavia, Ohio, in a farmhouse my wife and I bought in 1979 when the porch was rotted through and the well ran brown for the first 2 weeks. I drive a 1998 Chevy pickup with a patch of grey primer on the left rear fender that I have been meaning to paint since the Bush administration. I get my hair cut at a shop that still has a striped pole and charges $14. On Thursday mornings, I eat 2 eggs and wheat toast at a diner on Main Street, where the waitress, Dee, brings my coffee before I sit down. If you passed me in the parking lot at the grocery store, you would file me under old man on a fixed income, and you would not think about me again. People do it constantly. It has never bothered me one bit because it is not true. I retired from the army as a 4-star general. My retired pay comes to a little over $19,000 a month before taxes. The farmhouse has been paid off since 1994. My wife Nora and I spent 40 years quietly putting money away in accounts we almost never touched. And by the time she died, what we had built was enough that I stopped checking the balance because checking it felt like bragging to an empty room. I have never told my daughter any of that. Not the rank, not the money. That was not an accident. Nora had a line she used on me for 4 decades, usually when I came home irritated about somebody, and she would say it while she was doing something else entirely, which is how the true things usually arrive. "Warren," she would say, "people will tell you exactly who they are the minute they decide you can't do anything for them." I thought it was a clever thing to say. It took me most of my life to understand it was a set of instructions. Claire called me 3 weeks before that dinner. She teaches high school choir in Milford, and she calls me on Sunday afternoons, usually while she's grading, and I can always hear her pen. "Grant's parents want to do a dinner," she said, "for the engagement. Both families. That sounds nice. It's kind of a big deal to them. Then I'll wear a shirt with buttons." She laughed, and then she did not say anything for a second longer than she should have. "Dad, they're a little formal. I've had dinner with formal people, sweetheart." I know you have." Another pause. "Just, if Grant says anything, don't take it personally, okay? He's stressed about work." I said I would not take anything personally. Then I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a while, looking at the window over the sink, because a father can hear the sentence a daughter almost says. I had liked Grant Whitlock at the start. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier to tell this story if he had been awful from the beginning, and he was not. Claire brought him out to the house on a Saturday in the spring 3 years ago. He arrived with a bag of tomatoes from a farm stand, and he shook my hand like he meant it, and he asked me what was wrong with my mower, which is a good question to ask a man in his own driveway. He was 35 then. He had built a freight brokerage from 2 phones and a rented office into something with 40 employees, and he had done it himself, and he was proud of it in the way a man is entitled to be proud of a thing he actually built. He walked down to my basement that first afternoon and found my bench and stood there for 20 minutes, asking questions. That's how you know. I bind books. That is what I do with my hands. I have a sewing frame my wife gave me in 1988, a nipping press I bought at an estate auction in Kentucky, and a couple of drawers of linen thread and book cloth. I take blank paper, fold it into signatures, sew them by hand, round the spine with a hammer, and case the whole thing in linen and board. It takes me about 3 weeks to make one properly, and I make maybe 8 a year, and I give almost all of them away. Grant picked one up and turned it over and said, "You made this in a basement." I did. That's incredible. He meant it that day. The change did not happen all at once. It never does. If it happened all at once, somebody would stop it. The first thing I noticed was a Tuesday about 18 months in. The 3 of us went to dinner at a place in Hyde Park, and a young man dropped a tray somewhere behind us, and the whole room turned. Glass everywhere. The kid was maybe 20 and his face went red to the ears. Grant did not say anything cruel. He just exhaled through his nose and looked at his watch and said quietly to Claire, "This is what happens when you don't pay enough to hire adults." Claire said, "Grant." He said, "I'm just saying," which is a phrase that has never once in human history been followed by something worth saying. After that, I started seeing it in small places. He judged restaurants by whether they had valet. He talked about a college friend of his who had gone into teaching the way you would talk about a man recovering from an illness. He got a watch and put it on the table between us at lunch, face up so it would be seen. He came out to the farmhouse in December of that year to drop off something for Claire, and he stood in my driveway looking at my house with his hands in his pockets. And he said, "You know, Warren, the land alone out here has to be worth something now. You could sell, get into a nice patio home, no stairs, no roof to worry about." I like the stairs. You say that now. I'll keep saying it. He laughed like I had made a joke. I had not made a joke. He never called me Dad. He never called me Mr. Doyle either. For 3 years I was Warren, said in the tone people use for a coworker they like well enough. I let it go. I have never once in my life corrected a man about what to call me, and it cost me nothing. Here is what he never asked in 3 years. He never asked what I did before I retired. He asked what I did after. He asked about the books and the garden and whether I still hunted. He assumed the before was 30-something years of something dull and government adjacent, and I let the assumption sit there like a stone in a creek, because I could not think of a single honest reason to pick it up. Nora would have found the whole thing funny. She had a mean sense of humour about pride, and she came by it honestly. She died on a Tuesday in June, 5 years ago, in the side yard, kneeling in the dirt with a trowel in her hand. Aneurysm. The paramedic told me later she was gone before she hit the ground, and I have decided to believe him. 46 years. I came in from the barn to ask her whether she wanted to eat outside. For about 8 months afterward, I set out 2 cups every morning. I would fill the second one and then stand there. I did not do it out of grief exactly. I did it because my hands had learned it and my hands had not been told. What I did not do after she died was change anything. I had more money at 70 than I had ever had, and I kept the truck, kept the house, kept the coat. The coat matters to this story, so let me tell you about the coat. It is an olive canvas work jacket that Nora bought me at a farm supply store in 1981 when we were stationed at Fort Riley, and I was a captain making not very much. The right cuff has been mended twice. One of the snaps came off in 1996, and I replaced it with a brass one from a different jacket, so it does not match. And every time I fasten it, I think about the afternoon I did that, which was a good afternoon. It is not a nice coat. It was never a nice coat. It is warm and it fits and it works. I wore it to the engagement dinner. I want to be clear that I did not wear it to trap anybody. I did not sit in my kitchen rubbing my hands together and plotting. I put on a pressed white shirt and good grey trousers and my father's cufflinks, and then I walked out to the truck at 5:30 on a cold March evening and took the coat off the hook by the door because it was 34 degrees and that is what the coat is for. But I will tell you that as I was backing down the gravel, I did think about Nora, and I did say out loud to nobody, "All right, Nora, let's find out." The Whitlocks live in Indian Hill in a stone house set back from the road behind a stand of oaks, circular drive, lanterns on either side of the door that were on before dark. It is a beautiful house, and there is nothing wrong with a beautiful house. Grant met me in the driveway before I had the truck in park. "Warren, hey." He looked at the pickup and then passed it at the road. "Do me a favour and pull around behind the garage. The caterer's van is coming at 6 and the drive gets tight." There was no caterer's van. I want to be careful here because I did not know that at the time, and I did not know it for another 2 hours. But there was no caterer. Lorraine cooked. There was never going to be a van. So I pulled my truck around behind the garage, out of sight of the road and the windows, and I walked back up to the front door. Inside it was warm and smelled like rosemary, and there was a fire going. Claire came around the corner and hugged me hard, the way she does, with her whole weight. "You came. You invited me. You look nice." I looked like a man in a shirt. There were 9 of us. Douglas and Lorraine, Grant and Claire, Grant's sister Melissa and her husband, Lorraine's brother and his wife, who had driven up from Lexington, and me. Douglas Whitlock shook my hand at the door and did something almost nobody does anymore. He looked at my face the entire time, not at the coat as I took it off, not past my shoulder to see who was arriving behind me. My face. Then he said, "Warren, glad you came out." And he took the coat himself and hung it in the closet, instead of handing it to somebody. Small thing. I noticed it anyway. Dinner started well enough. Roast chicken, potatoes, a salad with pears in it. The uncle from Lexington talked about a cruise. Melissa talked about a kitchen renovation and the 11 weeks it took to get the right tile. Grant talked about a warehouse lease he was negotiating in Columbus and how the other side had blinked. I mostly listened. I have found that if you listen at a table for 90 minutes and say very little, people will tell you the whole architecture of what they believe. About 40 minutes in, Lorraine turned to me with a kind expression. "Warren, I hope you don't mind me asking, are you on the good Medicare or the regular one?" "The regular one, I imagine." Because Doug's cousin got talked into one of those plans, and it was a nightmare. If you ever need somebody to look at it, Melissa's very good with paperwork. "That's kind of you," Grant said without looking up from his plate. "Warren's got it handled. He's very self-sufficient." Self-sufficient. It is a compliment shaped like a diagnosis. A little later, the uncle asked what I had done for work, and before I could answer, Grant answered for me. Warren was Army, career guy, 30-some years. "Oh, thank you for your service," the uncle said, in the voice people use. "Yes, sir," I said. "It was a good life." "What did you do in it?" Douglas asked. I opened my mouth. "Logistics and admin mostly, right?" Grant said, and he said it warmly, generously, the way you help an old man across a curb he did not ask to cross. He doesn't like talking about it. Douglas Whitlock looked at his son for about a second and a half. Then he looked at me. He did not say anything. I said, something like that. And I ate a potato. I brought a gift that night. I had spent most of February on it. It was a book, quarter-bound in dark green linen with cream paper, 212 blank pages, sewn on 4 cords, with a ribbon marker. Inside the front board I had stamped one line in dull gold foil. "Nobody inherits a good name. You earn it again every morning." Claire opened it at the table and put her hand over her mouth. "Dad, it's for the 2 of you. Write things in it, doesn't matter what." She ran her thumb down the spine. "You made this?" "I did." "How long?" "A while." Grant took it and opened it and flipped through it the way you flip through a magazine in a waiting room. Then he closed it and set it down next to his plate. "That's a great hobby," he said. "Do you sell these? You could probably do well on Etsy. People pay stupid money for handmade stuff." "I give them away." "You should sell them." Douglas reached over and picked the book up. He opened it flat and looked at the spine from the inside, at the stitching, and his face changed. "This is sewn," he said. "It is. On cords. On 4. He turned it over in his hands. "I had a print shop for 9 years, before the supply business. We had an old man come in twice a month to do bindery work for us, and he sewed like this and he wouldn't let anybody watch him do it." He looked up at me. "How long does one of these take you?" 3 weeks, sometimes 4 if I'm not in a hurry." He nodded slowly and set it down, and he did not say anything else about it, but something had passed between us and Grant did not see it happen. Then dessert came out, and coffee, and the table got quiet in the way a table does when somebody has been waiting for a moment. Douglas stood up. He walked to the sideboard, took the envelope out of a drawer, came back, and slid it across to me. "I'd like you to read this before anybody talks about a date." I opened it. The first page said, "Memorandum of Family Understanding" at the top, and under that, in smaller type, the name of a law firm downtown with 3 names in it. The first 4 pages were about the wedding. Who was paying for what? The venue, the catering, the band, the rehearsal dinner, the flowers. A line item for valet parking that came to more than my truck is worth. All of it under a heading called Schedule A, Whitlock Family Contributions. Then there was Schedule B, Doyle Family Contributions. Under it one line, none anticipated. Mach. I read that twice, not because it stung. It did not sting. I read it twice because I wanted to be certain I was not inventing an insult that was not there. The next paragraph explained that the Whitlock family would assume, as a gift and without expectation of reimbursement, the customary obligations of the bride's family, and that the bride's father was asked to acknowledge this arrangement in writing so that no ambiguity or future resentment would arise. They wanted my signature on a piece of paper saying I could not pay for my daughter's wedding, and I was grateful they could. I kept reading. Behind the paperclip was a rider, 2 pages. It was headed Long-Term Care Accommodation, and it proposed that the Whitlock family would establish a fund to cover future assisted living or nursing costs for Warren J. Doyle, and that in exchange, the said Warren J. Doyle would waive any claim, present or future, against the marital assets of Grant and Claire Whitlock. They had priced my old age. Somebody had sat in an office with a calculator and worked out what it would cost to keep me somewhere, and they had decided it was cheaper than the risk of me needing help someday. The last document was a prenuptial agreement. Standard, well-drafted, nothing outrageous in it. Grant's business, his accounts, the condo in Naples, all protected, which is his right, and I would have advised the same. On page 6 there was a schedule of the bride's assets. Claire M. Doyle, estimated net worth $41,000. Expected inheritance, nominal. I set the papers down and squared the edges and folded my hands on the table. Nobody moved. Grant said, "It's not personal, Warren. It's just how these things get done now." "I understand." Lorraine said, "We're not trying to embarrass anyone. Quite the opposite. We wanted to take the pressure off." "I understand that too." Grant relaxed. I watched it happen. His shoulders came down half an inch, and he reached for his coffee. He thought I had agreed. Douglas Whitlock did not relax. He had not touched his coffee all evening, and he was looking at me the way a man looks at a piece of machinery that is making a sound it should not be making. Claire was staring at the tablecloth, and her eyes were wet and her jaw was set, and I recognised that expression too, because it was her mother's. "Dad," she said, "I didn't know about the rider." "I know you didn't. I saw the wedding pages, I didn't see the rest." "I know, sweetheart." Grant said, "It's a protection, Claire, for him as much as us." And I sat there and I thought about a Tuesday in 1997. Claire was 14, we were at Fort Leavenworth, and I drove her to school, most mornings in a Ford that had 190,000 miles on it, and a passenger door that you had to lift while you pulled. One morning in October, she asked me to let her out, at the corner by the church, instead of the front of the building. I said sure. I did not say anything else. I did it for 4 days. On the 5th day, Nora drove her, and Nora drove right up to the front doors, right into the middle of the drop-off line, and put the car in park and got out and walked around, and opened Claire's door for her, and stood there in a bathrobe. A bathrobe. In the drop-off line. At 7:40 in the morning, Claire told me later she wanted to die. She said she got out of that car and walked into that building and did not look at a single human being. That night, Nora sat on the end of her bed for a long time, and I stood in the hall like a coward and listened, and I heard my wife say, "I'm not doing that to be cruel. I'm doing it because someday somebody's going to be embarrassed of you, and I want you to already know how stupid it feels from the outside." Claire never asked to be dropped off at the corner again. She also never forgot it, and I know that because she used to bring it up at Thanksgiving, and laugh until she cried. I looked across the table at my 34-year-old daughter, sitting very straight in a nice dining room while people discussed her net worth, and I decided I had watched enough. "May I ask a question?" I said. "Of course," Grant said. "If Claire signs this, what exactly is she agreeing to? That the assets I built before the marriage stay mine. I don't have any argument with that. I'd have told her the same." "Then what?" "My argument isn't with what you're protecting. It's with what you've written down about her." Grant frowned. "It's a valuation. It's not an opinion." "It's both." I turned the page around and set my finger on the line. "Your attorney estimated my daughter's expected inheritance as nominal. I'd like to know where that number came from." He shrugged. He actually shrugged. "It's an assumption based on available information." "Whose information?" "Warren, come on." "No, I'm asking sincerely. Did you ask her?" Claire said quietly, "He didn't ask me." I turned to her. "Sweetheart, have I ever discussed my estate with you?" She blinked. "No." "Have you ever seen my accounts?" "No." "Have you ever asked me what I'm worth?" "No." Her voice went thin. "It's rude." "It is, and I appreciated it more than you know." I reached inside my jacket and took out a flat leather folder about the size of a paperback. It has been in my inside pocket for 30 years. It holds my identification, my medical card, an emergency contact sheet Nora typed up in 1990 that I have never had the heart to replace, and a few papers I keep close because I am 73 and I drive. I put it on the table. Claire said, "What is that?" "Something you've never needed to see." I opened it. A folded index card slid out onto the tablecloth. It is soft as cloth now, and the ink has gone brown, and it has 41 names on it in my handwriting. Douglas Whitlock looked at that card, and then he looked at me, and I watched a man arrive at a conclusion he had already half made. I took out my retired identification card and slid it across the table. Grant picked it up. He read it. He did not react. Then he read it again, and his eyes stopped moving, and I watched the blood leave his face in real time, from the jaw upward. "General," he said. Nobody answered him. Lorraine reached over and took it out of his hand and got her glasses up and said, "I don't understand what I'm looking at." "Grade," Douglas said. "Look at the grade." She looked. Then she set the card down very carefully, the way you set down something hot. Claire came around the table. She picked it up with both hands. She looked at the photograph and the name, and the line under it. "Dad." "Yes?" "This says 010. "It does." "That's..." She stopped. "Dad, that's a 4-star general." "It is." She sat down on the arm of the chair next to her, which was not her chair, and she looked at me like she had never seen me before. 39 years, I said. "I retired in 2013. Grant said, "That's not possible." I looked at him. It was the first time all evening I had looked at him directly for more than a second. "Why isn't it?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Because you..." He gestured vaguely at all of me. The shirt, the hands, the truck sitting behind the garage where he had put it. "Because you never said anything." "Nobody asked." "You'd have to be." He was scrambling now. That's a pension of. A little over 19,000 a month. The room went completely silent. Lorraine's cup touched her saucer and made a small sound, and she pulled her hand back like it had gone off. Melissa said, "A month. Before taxes." Grant sat back in his chair very slowly. I want to be fair to him. I do not think he was calculating in that moment. I think something in him was simply falling down, floor by floor, and he was standing inside it. Douglas Whitlock said, to nobody, "I knew it." Every head turned. "You knew?" Grant said. "I didn't know." His father was still looking at me. "I suspected." He came in the door, and he stood in my entryway, with his feet at shoulder width and his hands behind him, and he waited for my wife to sit before he sat. "I did 4 years in the Marine Corps, and I made sergeant, and I have never once been in a room with a man who stood like that, who wasn't somebody." He turned to his son. "You told me he was a logistics clerk." "That's what I assumed." "You assumed?" I said, "There's more, and then I'd like to stop." I took out the trust summaries. I keep them folded in that folder because my attorney told me to, and because I am the last person alive who knows where everything is. I handed them to Claire. She read the first page and her hands started shaking. "The farmhouse," she said. "It's been in your name since 2019. Since," she looked up, "since Mum died. 4 months after. You never told me. You didn't need to carry it." She turned the page. "The land in Adams County. Also yours. The cabin's a wreck, so don't get excited. Dad, this account." She stopped and turned it toward me like I might not know. "Dad, I know. This says 4.1. It says 4.3 now. It was a good year." She put the papers down on the table and covered her face with both hands and made a sound I've only heard from her twice. Once at her mother's funeral and once when she was 7 and broke her arm. I said the rest quietly because I wanted it done. There are education accounts for any children you have. There's a scholarship at the community college in your mother's name, and it pays 4 tuitions a year, and the recipients don't know who funds it, and I'd like it to stay that way. And when I go, there's an amount that goes to the Ohio chapter of an organisation that helps the families of soldiers who don't come back, and the number is not small. Nobody said anything. Lorraine was crying silently, in the way of a woman who has just understood something about her own house. I reached over and put the memorandum on top of the trust papers, and pushed the whole stack an inch toward Grant. "Your attorney wrote that my daughter brings nothing into this marriage. That was never true. It was just never announced." I stopped. "And your rider proposed to pay for a room for me somewhere, someday, in exchange for my agreement to never need anything. I want you to sit with that one for a while." Douglas Whitlock stood up. He walked to the end of the table, and he put both hands on the back of an empty chair, and he looked at his son. "I want to say something, and then I'm going to sit down. Dad, I paid for that memorandum, $2,200, and it went out of my account, and I put it on this table tonight, in front of everybody, instead of handing it to him in the driveway." He let that sit. "You want to know why I did it in front of everybody?" Grant did not answer. "Because I wanted you to hear yourself say it out loud, in a room, with witnesses. I've been listening to you for 2 years, and I kept telling your mother it was a phase, and tonight I decided I was done telling her that. That's not fair. You had me put a clause in a legal document about where a man is going to die." Douglas's voice never went up. "Not once. That is what made it terrible. You did that. You asked me to protect you from a 73-year-old widower who binds books in his basement and drives a truck older than your business." Grant's ears had gone red. "You stopped going to see your grandmother when she moved to the place in Kenwood. I've been slammed. You told your sister the wedding venue she picked was fine if she wanted her pictures to look like a Marriott." Melissa looked at her plate. "You laughed at Kevin Doyle at Thanksgiving because he still drives that Ranger, and Kevin has 3 kids and works nights. Dad, I get it." "You don't, though." Douglas straightened up. "I pulled wire for 11 years. 11. I was 34 years old before I owned anything that wasn't on a payment plan. Your mother's family thought she was throwing herself away, and they were not quiet about it." He pointed at the table, at the papers, without looking at them. "I made you so you would never have to feel what I felt in a room like that. And it turns out all I did was put you on the other side of it." Nobody breathed. Claire was still sitting on the arm of that chair, with her hands in her lap. Grant stood up. For a second I thought he was going to leave, and I would not have blamed him. He walked out of the dining room and down the hall. He came back carrying my coat. He stood there holding it in both hands, and it looked absurd in that house. The mended cuff, the mismatched brass snap, canvas gone soft and pale at the shoulders. "I looked at this in the entryway," he said. His voice was not working right. "And I decided who you were. I did it in about 2 seconds, and I felt good about it. I did not say anything. I've been doing that to people for a long time." He looked up. "It didn't tell me anything about you at all. It told me about me." He held it out. I took it. "I'm sorry, Warren." I said, "Try again." He looked confused. "What?" "You've called me Warren for 3 years. I never minded. But if you are apologising, do it properly." He stood there for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Dad." Claire put her head down on the table and cried. I got up and I put my arms around him, and he held on longer than I expected. And I want to be honest and say that I did not entirely forgive him in that moment. I have been in enough rooms to know that the first apology is usually just embarrassment finding its voice. But it was a start, and starts are worth something. When we sat back down, Grant picked up the envelope and took out the rider and the memorandum and tore them in half, and then in half again and set the pieces next to his plate. Then he took the prenuptial agreement and put it in front of Claire. "Not tonight," he said. "I want us to do this with a different lawyer, one that works for both of us." "Grant? And I want to ask him something first." He turned to me. "How do you spend 39 years becoming that and then live like it never happened?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because it did happen," I said, "and then it stopped." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. I had a first sergeant in 1978 named Amos Pruitt, who told me something I did not understand until I was about 60. He said, 'Sir, nobody's saluting you. They're saluting the slot you're standing in. And someday you're going to step out of it, and somebody else is going to step in, and the salutes are going to go right on happening. And none of them will be for you.'" Douglas made a small sound of recognition. "I stepped out of it in 2013. I drove home. Nora had made a pot roast, and the next morning I got up and I was a man in a kitchen in Ohio." I shrugged. "The stars were real, they just weren't mine. They belonged to the job, and the job belonged to the country, and I gave it back on a Friday." "So what's left?" I nodded at the green book sitting by his plate. He picked it up and opened the front board and read the line again, slower this time. "Nobody inherits a good name. You earn it again every morning." "Munikin," I said, "that's what's left. Your company will belong to somebody else eventually. Every dollar any of us has is just passing through on its way to somebody we'll never meet. What sticks around is how a waiter remembers you, how your sister describes you to her husband in the car on the way home." I looked at him. "How a man in a bad coat talks about you after he leaves your house." They did not set a date that night. They set one 4 months later, and the wedding happened 8 months after that, in September, in a small stone church in Milford that Claire has loved since she was 12. Grant asked for the delay himself. He told Claire he did not want to marry her as the man who had been sitting at that table in March. I watched him work at it. He started coming out to Batavia on Saturday mornings. At first I think he came because he felt like he had to. He would show up at 9 with coffee and stand in my basement with his hands in his pockets. And after about the 4th week, he asked if I would teach him to fold a signature. He was terrible at it, genuinely bad. His folds were off by a 16th, and he could not keep his thread tension even, and he punched his sewing stations crooked and had to start over 3 times. He got frustrated in a way that told me a lot, because here was a man who had not been bad at something in 15 years and had forgotten what it feels like. He kept coming. He started driving down to the VA facility in Fort Thomas with me on the 3rd Thursday of the month. The first time he did not know what to say to anybody, and he told me so in the parking lot afterward. "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "Sit down and let them talk. That's the whole job." So he sat. He listened to a career veteran named Ambrose tell the same story about a truck 4 times in one visit. He listened to a woman named Deb who did 2 tours as a medic and who spent an hour telling him about a 19-year-old she could not keep alive in 2004. He was quiet the whole drive home that day. Somewhere around Newport, he said, "I've spent my whole adult life impressed by people who made money." I let him get to the rest of it himself. I don't think I've ever once been impressed by somebody who gave something up. There were smaller things too, and the smaller things are how you actually know. He started calling his grandmother in Kenwood on Sunday nights. He went back to the restaurant in Hyde Park and found the manager and asked the name of the young man who had dropped the tray a year and a half earlier. And the kid did not work there anymore, and Grant could not do anything about it. And I think that bothered him more than if he had been able to. He fired a salesman that summer, not for numbers, but for the way the man talked to the receptionist. In August, I came out of the hardware store in Batavia and saw him in the parking lot, loading 40-pound bags of softener salt into the trunk of a car for a woman I did not recognise. He did not see me. There was nobody watching, no phone out, nothing to be gained. That is when I knew it had taken. A man's apology is a sentence. His character is what he does when the room is empty. The wedding was on the 12th of September, and it was warm, and the church windows were open, and you could hear traffic during the vows. There was no valet. Half of Claire's choir sang. Douglas Whitlock cried harder than anybody and did not attempt to hide it. Lorraine sat next to me at the reception and said, without preamble, I have thought about the Medicare question every week since March, and I told her to let it go, and she said she was working on it. That morning I got dressed at the farmhouse, and I stood in front of the closet for a minute, and then I took the coat off the hook and laid it on the back seat of the truck. I did not wear it. It was 80 degrees, but I brought it because Nora bought it, and because I wanted it in the building. Grant found me in the church parking lot 20 minutes before the ceremony. He was already in his tuxedo and he was carrying something wrapped in brown paper. I wanted to do this before people are around. I opened it. It was a book, case-bound about 6 inches by 9, covered in a dark blue cloth he had clearly bought too much of. The corners were not turned in properly. The spine had a lump in it where he had rounded it too hard with the hammer. One of the signatures was sewn in backward, and you could see it if you knew what to look for, and I knew what to look for. It was, without any exaggeration, one of the worst-made books I have ever held. 6 tries, he said. That's the 6th. I didn't trust my voice, so I opened the front board. He had not stamped anything. He had written it in pen, badly, in a hand that shook. I knew your rank in about 4 seconds. It took me a year to learn your name. I stood in a church parking lot, in a tuxedo shirt, and held a crooked blue book, and could not say one word. Grant said, "It's not very good." "No," I said. "It's not. I'll get better." "I know you will." He hugged me and then he went inside to marry my daughter. People sometimes ask me whether that dinner in March fixed our family, and I always tell them that is the wrong question. That dinner did not fix anything. It just turned the lights on. What was in that room was already in that room. The envelope only made everybody look at it. I still drive the truck. I still eat at the diner on Thursdays, and Dee still brings the coffee before I sit. I still have not painted the fender. The money has never once made me happy. I want to say that plainly, because I know how it sounds, coming from a man with $4 million. It made me safe, and safe is not nothing, and I'm grateful for it. But I have never had a single good day because of it. The good days were a woman in a bathrobe standing in a drop-off line, a basement that smells like wheat paste, a young man who was wrong about me and did the hard work of becoming somebody else. About it. That is the whole inventory. It fits in one hand. If you have somebody in your life right now that you have quietly decided about, based on a car or a coat or a job title, I would ask you to go find out whether you were right. You might be, but you might be sitting across the table from somebody you have never once actually met. And if this story got somewhere in you, I'd be grateful if you tell me about it in the comments. Send it to the person it made you think of. And subscribe because I've got more of these and I'd like you here for them. Ita ati na maina.